Recently, we were lucky enough to attend an event for Lords of the Fallen and get some hands-on time with an early version of the game. So we're going to round up our thoughts and impressions and some of the interesting mechanics after trying it out. We sent Vesmore over, who has played many Souls-like games before, so he has a pretty good grip on the genre itself and what makes them fun or exciting. If you aren't up to speed on Lords of the Fallen, it's an upcoming reboot of their original game that was released back in 2014 and is being developed by CI Games. It's set in a dark fantasy world, and you'll take on the role of a newly christened Dark Crusader. We'll be fighting to prevent the return of a demon god whose resurrection is getting closer and closer, and interestingly, we can use the power of our lantern to cross between the world of the living, Axiom, and the world of the dead, Umbral. The game is set to release on the 13th of October this year of 2023 for PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S. Although we don't have our own gameplay captured to show you, we have been provided with a bunch of new gameplay to show off instead. And first I wanted to go over a pretty major mechanic of the game that sets it apart from other titles. For veterans of the series, the world switching mechanics will be familiar to you, but for those of you that are new, the game revolves around the idea of switching between the world of Axiom and Umbral. Axiom can be seen as the neutral state of the world, and it's kind of like where the player will want to be, as the enemies are a lot more manageable. However, by using the lantern, it allows us to peer into the world of Umbral. By quite literally shining a light, it shows the Umbral version of whatever you point it at. This allows us to take note of where Umbral enemies are, as well as to traverse across Umbral-specific platforms and terrain, which might not even exist in the Axiom version of the world. In combat, our lantern can even be used to soul flay enemies, slowing down their physical bodies and actually pulling out their soul. You can then attack the soul to build up withered damage on them. This withered damage causes health bars to begin to grey out. Then, if struck, the target will lose all of that greyed out portion of their health bar at once. Both us as players and enemies can take this withered damage throughout different means, and successfully landing hits while you have withered damage yourself will restore some of that greyed out health back to you, meaning you can get rid of withered damage so long as you don't get hit by a regular attack while doing so. And by using the lantern, or when you die, you can actually fully cross into the Umbral world, allowing you to interact with the different puzzles and mechanics within. This is usually a means to progress through the game and does happen fairly frequently. Both worlds have their challenges, with Axiom being the more traditional gameplay experience, while Umbral, on the other hand, is a nightmarish realm full of dangers that slowly grow in strength and intensity the longer you stay within. As for our impressions of the gameplay though, it was quite an interesting one. From the 3 or so hours that Vesmore played, we can pretty much say that CI Games definitely nailed the atmosphere. The dark fantasy theme is strong throughout, and there's definitely an interesting contrast between the more traditional visuals of Axiom and the more bizarre Lovecraftian theme of the Umbral world. Graphically, we were impressed, and because it looked visually great, it was highly immersive. The game sticks to the staples of the genre though, where you start off with an epic cutscene ending in a rather gritty manner, which basically reminds you you're going to be dying a lot while playing. You get to choose one of 9 classes at the start, which look to have a good variety of playstyles that fans of the genre will be familiar with. We saw builds that focused around heavy-hitting two-handed weapons, to more fast-paced options like dual-wielding and some magic. Vesmore opted for a dexterity build that utilizes twin daggers, which was a playstyle he was told would be perfect to do a parry-heavy approach by one of the developers. As mentioned, there were several magic classes to pick from, but we weren't advised to play them due to time constraints. When it comes to the difficulty, the game is about what you would expect with a world full of enemies that will ruin your day if you aren't fully switched on and focused. Vesmore found himself getting pretty comfortable with the attack patterns of the more basic enemies pretty quickly, and there was a decent amount of enemy variety that kept it interesting. The designs for these enemies were also recognizable enough that you could quickly determine what to look out for when running between new rooms. The combat itself definitely felt solid, although it was less weighty feeling than games like Elden Ring or Bloodborne. Ves did, however, quickly come to regret his class choice, opting for a parry-focused playstyle once he reached the elite enemies. This is because the parries didn't seem to fully stagger their attacks, which meant it was quite punishing to fight. It turns out that enemies actually have a poise meter, which if emptied will cause them to become vulnerable to a coup de grace type move, where you basically impale them with your weapon. Harder enemies though have more poise, and as such could power through your parries and continue their attack strings. This felt a little off, especially if you've picked a parry-heavy class type. Parrying gripes aside though, we did find the other mechanics unique to Lords of the Fallen to be a very refreshing take. Using the lantern to soul flay enemies took a little bit of getting used to, but once we got the hang of it, we found it to be an excellent tool to isolate those elite enemies. Interestingly, the game is a bit more forgiving in some aspects of the gameplay than others in this genre, as instead of being forced back to a checkpoint upon death, you're instead transported to the Umbral world, which gives you a chance to find a resurrection point without losing your vigor, which is essentially the equivalent of souls that power you up. As mentioned before, Axiom is kind of like your more standard Souls-like experience. You'll travel through the world and find checkpoints. Umbral, however, feels like you're just trying to survive as the world throws more and more enemies at you with a kind of time pressure mechanic that increases the level of threats coming your way over time. Things start out tame with more easy cannon fodder style mobs spawning periodically in, and eventually will grow to more elite enemies chasing you down. We found this to be a nice contrast to running around in Axiom, but it was sometimes punishing to have a constant flow of mobs chasing you down, especially in parts of the game where it was easy to fall to your death. On top of this, when in the Umbral world, spending too much time in a single area or spot would simply cause you to become overwhelmed by enemies. So if you aren't focusing on taking those enemies down as they come in, you can get overwhelmed. But we do believe if you play a class with a larger, heavier hitting weapon that perhaps has a cleave-like attack, this wouldn't be too much of a problem. When it comes to the bosses, these were probably the best part of the game in terms of what we played. Within these boss fights, there were both epic set pieces and interesting mechanics that were presented. Vestmore felt these were a good mix of full-blown boss battles, as well as lower-powered mid-bosses to break up exploration a little bit. In total, Vestmore got to take on 5 bosses, each one with their own unique mechanics, and he felt that the different classes' playstyles would definitely have different levels of success against each of them. One thing that's interesting to note is that exploring the Umbral world, the more dangerous, nightmarish version, is meant to be very rewarding for you with special rare loot to find according to the developers. Obviously, in the version of the game we played, we didn't get to explore everything, but we didn't find too much special stuff during our playthrough. Vestmore ultimately thinks if you're a fan of the Souls genre, you'll get pretty good bang for your buck when it comes to Lords of the Fallen. It's got pretty much everything you'd want out of a Soulsborne experience, but with extra unique mechanics layered on top, like the lantern system that we've mentioned throughout. For newcomers looking to dip their toes into the genre, they will probably find some fun here, as the game features full 2-player co-op from the very start to the end. And with some of those more forgiving gameplay mechanics like not instantly losing all of your vigor, this will probably be a nice entry point into the genre if you're someone that hasn't tried them out before. Although we didn't get to try it out ourselves, the game is also slated to have a full PvP system with invasions and the like, which may be of interest if you do enjoy your PvP in these kind of games. So tell us in the comments, when you play a Souls-like game, what class do you end up going for? Do you prefer to be fast and nimble or slow and heavy hitting? Or are you more of a magic person? Tell us in the comments down below. And the 2 videos on screen now, we think you'll really enjoy if you did enjoy this one. You don't have to watch them if you don't want to, but if you did like this video, you're probably going to like these ones too. And then tell us what you think after watching in the comments down below.